1 week earlier, the Iovis Diamantis Septum glided across the pristine, deep blue waters of the Altean Sea under rose-tinted clouds streaking across the tranquil azure sky. Homeward bound, the crew of the sleek galley set themselves to the tasks that had occupied them for much of the voyage. However, they found it difficult to keep their minds on their work as they vied to be the first to cast a weather eye on the capital city. Visions of grand spires and lofty towers filled the minds of the new recruits, their hearts swelling with bated anticipation as they were finally set to visit the wonders of the fabled city and partake in its innumerable delights. For the older men, they were eager to port for an entirely different reason. Few had known the nature of their cargo when this short trek had been hastily assembled. The captain had attempted to maintain an air of secrecy about the entire voyage, but royals have a mind of their own. It was not long before a tall, dark figure took to strolling about the deck of the ship at night. At first, only the most foolhardy of souls ventured to cast curious glances at their peculiar passenger on such occasions, but before long many a sailor had lingered topside to catch a glimpse for themselves. After a few nights, stories began to stir amongst the sailors of the tall warrior whose face was concealed by a golden mask. Soon word began to circulate that the visage of the mask was of the fallen sire of Nautah, and it became apparent to all who had eyes to see and ears to hear the mysterious passenger was none other than the mournful prince. A cheer rang through the crew as a keen-eyed sailor found the northern fang of Cleon, one of a pair of lighthouses set outside the capital's crescent harbor. From among the teeming sailors brimming with excitement, a long shadow emerged from the captain's quarters and strode across the deck of the Iovis Diamantis. Without a word, those who labored to bring the vessel into port parted around the ominous form. Callously the king's likeness surveyed the former seat of his power. The distant ringing of hammers carried by the brisk briny sea brought tidings of battles to come, and visions of souls lost on distant fields. Like an omen of doom, billows of light gray smoke rose from the forges, clouding the harbor and cloaking the grandeur of the Nautanite capital city. Piercing the smoke-laden veil, jet-black towers rose, crowned with mighty scarlet spires, trimmed with sprawling golden ivy. The tallest of these mighty bastions proudly bore the fluttering banners of the 7 territories that formed the nation of Nautah. Soon, an 8th banner would soar, as construction was well underway on the latest tower, proclaiming the newly born empire's triumphs over the eastern isles. The crisp breeze mingled with the thousands of fragrances of spices, perfumes, and ointments from across all the Heartlands, now laid to rest on the sprawling docks and wharfs of Nautah's grand jewel, Cleon. The sun lent its vigor to the crest of the fallen sovereign, and light issued forth from the cloak as the sea's gentle breath swept back the figure's hood. Pride swelled from the king's unyielding visage as his hollowed eyes admired the majesty of he and his forefathers' labors. The peculiar sight was lost to all save the captain, whose gaze never left the haunting form as he pondered the thoughts of the figure beneath the mask. Among the familiar streets of his home, the figure found peace. Far from the prying eyes of the gawkers he skirted throughout the voyage, he found that Cleon's throngs paid little heed to a shrouded man so long as he did not venture too close to a merchant's stall. Navigating through the market, the prince expertly wove through the bustling crowds till he slipped from the lower port and made his way to the business district. Here the way was less crowded, and it was more difficult for he and his bodyguards, trailing distantly behind him, to go unnoticed. However, these streets were as familiar to the prince as the battlefield. Stalking from shadow to shadow as the grandeur of the buildings grew with their stature, the prince could not help but recall ventures from his youth. Many an early morning had seen him creep back to the villas within his father's domain. Back then such journeys often ended with the watchful eye of a vigilant guard alerting the king to his antics and receiving a stern dressing down. Today, however, his chore was simpler. He only wished to avoid drawing unnecessary attention before he reached his objective and absconded the city later tonight. Should he arrive at any degree of fanfare, the sun would not set before some soul conjured a disaster, and Andrew find himself embroiled in the tedium of administration. Finally, he reached the palisade leading to Nauta's seat of power. Here he was forced to reveal his identity and intentions to a pair of startled men-at-arms before being granted entry to the outer court of Cleon's Heart, a city within a city as it were. Here all the sights and sounds of the lower city could be found, only more splendid, and with all operations run by someone of high birth, or favored by one of the houses. Having crossed one checkpoint, the prince was swiftly met by yet another. This time, however, the guards were expecting him, and offered salute to their prince and future sire. This alarmed the young man, who wondered if his scheme had somehow been revealed, until he saw a courier begin his descent back to the first outpost. His grace was swiftly ushered within the walls of the most hallowed site in all of Nauta, the halls of the lawgivers, or the court imperium as the nobles had come to call it. Through richly adorned courtyards on paths of seamless onyx stone, Andrew, prince and future king of Nauta, navigated his way through the assortment of nobles, waiting for the High Council to be dismissed and for final word of this year's delegation to be announced. Many were eager to escape from this most majestic venue and indulge in the profits of this year's campaigns. Yet there were those whose fortunes had been less favorable and were loath to face the long winter that awaited them in their own regions. Others still whose plots were yet to be fully set into motion, and those whose eyes were clouded by the glint of gold yet to be realized. No matter the state in which the king's hollow eyes found his subjects, all were shook from their worlds they had found themselves, and quickly bowed low in reverence of the fallen and his avenger. Under his mask, a smirk curled across the prince's mouth, as the royals observed him with all the caution of a man eyeing a sea blight not an arm's length away. This interlude in courtly duties, created by the mask and his oath of vengeance, had caused his facial discipline to erode. Should he ever decide to end his time in mourning and remove his mask, he would need to be more mindful. Each arch of a brow told a story, every smile lay a veiled threat, and the compassionate ear of a confidant concealed a conniving mind. Even now he could feel the courtier's gaze clawing at the mask, peeling back the intricate metal to derive any intent from the man behind the stoic face of the fallen king. Arriving at the great chamber, Andrew surveyed the sparse array of junior archons and attendants, all sectioned off in pairs or groups of 3. Following muffled gasps and bulging eyes, the dazzling array of Nauta's most adept underlings each offered an elaborate and exaggerated bow. The preening throng eventually abated after their extravagant display, and returned to their games of intrigue, albeit in more reserved tones. A tiring thought, but one which was quickly brushed aside as the large Sigillian and jasper doors creaked open, just enough for a delicate figure to slip from the assembly's chamber. Dressed in the lily white and scarlet of House Osnapar, the willowy frame of Archon Ephrath froze upon seeing the king's visage. A flicker of a smile flashed in her dark brown eyes before she turned on her heel and strode gracefully from the room, casting a wry eye over her shoulder as she did. No sooner had the raven-haired maiden disappeared, the dulcet tones of the city's bell rang, announcing the dismissal of this year's high court. Within moments the heavy doors swung open, giving a wide berth to the senior archons and their advisors, who slowly trickled out of the assembly's chamber, dragging the discourse of the day out to the very end. The juniors and the courtiers turned to greet the archons and gain news of the day's proceedings. However, as soon as they noticed Andrew, their chatter quieted before offering solemn pleasantries. Afterwards, the archons continued their deliberation, if warily and in hushed tones. Eventually, the throng of humanity cleared enough for him to enter the court imperium's great chamber, now populated by a handful of Alari who dutifully cleaned the floor and benches of wine, platters and shattered crystal from all corners of the political arena. The few archons remaining shuffled toward the exit as Andrew surveyed the room in search of his kinsman. Out of the corner of his eye, Andrew caught a fleeting glimpse of Timon's back as he slipped into the darkness of the inner sanctum. A surge of joy mingled with a pang of anxiety filled his heart as he took a weighty step forward, following after the King Regent who retreated behind closed doors. His head raced as he searched his thoughts for the appropriate tenor. On his voyage back, not a day had passed with this moment failing to enter his mind. Now, it was finally here, and he had yet to settle on the appropriate manner to broach his scheme with Timon. Taking a sharp breath, Andrew proceeded to the council hall, reserved for the king and his closest confidants. In a moment, the young man had crossed the threshold and was met by the beleaguered yet steady visage of the man who ruled in his stead. Timon's furrowed brow now bore a twinge of gray, and though his eyes flashed at seeing the prince, he remained composed. It was the second figure, looming at the right hand of the King Regent, who dutifully greeted Andrew. The two guardsmen on either side of Timon rose and offered a salute before taking their post on the outside of the inner sanctum. This left Andrew and his kinsman with the Viceroy of Cleon, who did not stir from his position at the regent's right hand. After a brief pause, Timon ordered the Viceroy to take those who still lingered with him from the great chamber. Without a moment's deliberation, the stout fellow snapped to his feet and was marching from the hall with the guards and the Alari. However, Andrew noted the chill that came over him as the reserved fellow passed him by. Both men remained silent till the last echo of the great doors fell silent. Once Andrew was certain they were alone, the young man slipped the weighty mask from his face and haphazardly tossed the visage to an overstuffed cushion. "It has been too long, Timon," Andrew said as he closed the gap between the two and sought to embrace his kinsman. For his part, Timon rose to meet his friend, offering a weak smile and a hearty embrace. "You look well," the prince quipped as he studied the fresh creases on the regent's brow. "Court has not been too trying, I hope." A breathy chuckle escaped Timon's lips before trailing off. "We both knew what would be demanded of us when we set out on this path. This burden is not too great to bear, so I will not sully this joyous occasion with idle murmurs. Sit. Your journey has been long and undoubtedly taxing." Timon continued as Andrew took a seat across from his mask. "The war goes well, I hear in no small part due to you and that daring comrade of yours. Oh, what was his name?" "Matthias," Andrew retorted as Timon retreated to a wine rack at the far end of the room. "That's the one," Timon said as he plucked 2 onyx chalices and a bottle of Cleon's finest from off the ornate stand before taking a seat beside his friend. "A fine soldier, daring leader. When they're not mesmerized by our newfound holdings in Crete, the archons will not cease singing his praises. His one sin seems to be his lack of ambition." "Indeed," Andrew smiled, reflecting on distant fields and clashing steel. "He is quite content to live and die on the battlefield. After our reunion, I have plans to meet with him." "Really?" the regent perked. "I expected you would wish to see Cephas. He is getting wed within a fortnight if I'm not mistaken, and once more he intends for the ceremony to take place in Trondheim. He could be leaving any moment now." "Really? What reasoning could he have for such an undertaking?" Andrew inquired, feigning ignorance. "Some romantic dribble," Timon said as he quaffed a stout draught of wine. "It has been the opinion of the court sorcerers that the celestial alignment of the 9 will be most brilliant in Trondheim. Cephas seems to believe that it will prove most fortuitous for he and his bride to be wed under such a rare and auspicious sign." "Dribble indeed," Andrew quipped, barely containing a smirk. "Aye, but he loves that maiden," Timon reflected into his goblet. "A beautiful thing, but I fail to see any of these outstanding virtues you vouch for. A rather plain lady from an upstart family. If not for their newfound prosperity, I would have said it a waste of Cephas's potential to have him form a union with such a family. You did say it was a waste of his potential, Andrew retorted glibly. Had I not plied you with wine from my father's prize store, you would never have allowed a rival to your enterprises to marry into the family. A decision I lament to this day, Timon muttered, feigning remorse as he hoisted a goblet filled with some of Andrew's bribe. Still, if I were a better man, I would have annulled the arrangement on principle alone. Every moment of his military leave was spent with her. Can you believe that? I, the man who secured his eternal happiness, and he will not even offer his thanks. I am afraid that we simply cannot compete with the charms and wiles of maidens, Andrew chuckled. Us bachelors must find solace from our sorrows in one another's company. Timon chuckled as he poured himself another splash of the ruby-red vintage, becoming entranced by its color. Still, in all the years I have known Cephas, he has been a man of even keel. Far be it from him to see a declaration of his love in the stars. Unless this maiden has had so profound a change on his character, I do not see why he would care to venture to a foreign land in order to affirm his vows. It is not as if the stars will be hidden here. He should have the ceremony in Cleon, where full honors may be conducted. It is not proper. A man of his station and career is entitled to a far more glorious commemoration than to be wed in some forsaken vale. And Lysistra? I cannot imagine anything she would like more than to prance among all of the Archons, myself included, who sneered at her low birth as she lays claim to one of the most noble names in all of Nautah. Once more a principality so close to the border of that most dreadful land, what will the court think of such a risk? A wry smile slid across Andrew's lips, which was quickly noticed by the wily politician even in his relaxed disposition. A curious arch of his brow was enough to spur Andrew to elaborate. I feel, as I am certain you do as well, that it would be most inappropriate to allow a decorated veteran, a friend of the crown, and a person of such a prestigious position to venture into a, if friendly, uncontrolled area. Timon's eyes hardened and his jaw clenched, but Andrew continued steadfast. I feel that it would be right and proper if the procession was granted a vanguard to accompany them on their journey. Silently the regent rose. Clasping his hands behind his back, he turned from the young prince before clearing his throat. We both knew what would be demanded of us when we set out on this path. The risks associated with this little venture of yours, if realized, would end my entire career, and cast a shadow so long on your reign, it may well be struck from the annals of history. I say this not to dissuade your decision, I know you too well, and once more, you will always be my liege. But I consider it my duty to remind you of the consequences that may well come of any indiscretions. Andrew, disregarding his cousin's introspective nature, you are much too severe, Timon. I will not even be at the ceremony. The prince and future king directly overseeing the wishes of one of the nation's favorite sons and personal friend of the throne is quite natural. Who would offer objection? Who would dare question intent or method? Timon released an exasperated sigh. Even so, he allowed his hands to fall to his side, and Andrew knew that any resistance would be hollow. Turning to face his friend once more, using propriety as a shield for your own devices will lead us to a point of no return. Up to this point, no man could bring into question your motives or your devotion to your vow of vengeance. This, when the assembly gains word of your ploy, if they have not discovered it already, will draw attention to this arrangement of ours. The legitimacy of my right to reign in your stead and the seriousness of your debt of blood against the house of Yolanda are intrinsically linked. I will not relitigate the issue. However, remember what is at stake should the houses start questioning your resolve. Annoyed, Andrew released a heavy sigh, but did not dispute his kinsman's concerns. The prince hated it when Timon waxed poetically, even if deep down he knew his friend was correct. He knew the risk he was taking, and the dangers posed. Still, when he met Timon's searching gaze, He felt a familiar pang of anxiety that had become a staple of their meetings as of late. Reflexively, Andrew sought to quell the unpleasantness. You know better than I the justifications for heading such an expedition. Whatever risks associated with this venture are matched by the goodwill the Popules will bestow upon me. No, us, for rewarding one of Nalta's most loyal servants. The deed will be done before the houses are the wiser. Afterwards, who could raise an objection to the future king, fresh off another fruitful campaign, and having adorned one of Nalta's favorite sons in a manner befitting his station? They cannot, and they will not. They will simply have to take my word that I did not participate in any of the festivities, Andrew reasoned, and then quipped, which will be such a shame. But you will not, Timon retorted firmly. You won't jeopardize my house. Any hand-wringing on your part will only take years off your life, Andrew smirked. I shall be the very image of chaste. I am capable of moderation despite what your wicked mind may say. Timon, returning to his more amenable persona, jibed merrily, I'll drink to that. The next few hours saw the tenor of the conversation turn to less tense topics. Timon insisted that they refrain from political talk and wished for a first-hand account of the front. Andrew regaled him with tales of clashing lines, single combat in the midst of the tangled fray of men and horses, and the odd comedic mishap along the way. Of all the seasons of campaigning, Andrew found himself unable to recall a more eventful year that had been less consequential. Indeed, his tales sounded to Timon's ears more like a spirited holiday in a port town than a war between two ancient foes. By the time the sun started to melt into the western horizon, Timon was apple-cheeked, and he was slurring every third word as he filled Andrew in on the comings and goings of Cleon, as well as the expansion of their island holdings. Timon's family were famed shipwrights, so he always kept a weather eye on all of the seaward expeditions, and when he got the chance, he would be sure to share his fount of knowledge with any hapless passerby. Andrew was glad to see his old friend back the way he remembered, but he knew that their time together was nearing its conclusion. Eventually, Andrew was able to break into the conversation and extract himself from the pleasant reunion. Timon attempted to protest at first, but he decided he would find company with another bottle. As Andrew exited the inner chamber, an exasperated comment echoed through the still air. Well, that was longer than expected. Out of the corner of his eye, Andrew perceived the figure of Solus of Thales leaning idly to the left of the door. In the dim light, the man's body resembled a statue on its pedal. However, as soon as the prince entered the chamber, he dutifully gravitated toward Andrew until they could converse at a whisper's breadth. Andrew contained a start before slipping his mask back on. What are you doing here? I instructed you to meet me at the port. Issues arose and issues were dispatched, Solus replied dryly, and then continued. The necessary preparations have been made, in accordance with your specifications, my liege. Solus informed Andrew of the steps necessary for them to leave on schedule, detailing the preparations made in Trondheim, as well as the logistics for getting out of Cleon unimpeded. Exiting the chamber, the prince and his accomplice passed a pair of guards who snapped to attention and readied their weapons at the sight of Solus emerging from the forbidden confines of the inner sanctum. However, with a wave of his hand, the prince put them at ease, and in hushed tones, Andrew and his lieutenant continued their conversation as they marched down the grand corridors. Andrew's mind focused on each word Solus uttered. He had the utmost confidence in their scheme. All variables had been accounted for. The opportunity for possible disruptions had been minimized. Hopefully no unforeseen hurdles would arise. Solus informed Andrew of the steps necessary for them to leave on schedule, detailing the preparations made in Trondheim, as well as the logistics for getting out of Cleon unimpeded. Exiting the chamber, the prince and his accomplice passed a pair of guards who snapped to attention and readied their weapons at the sight of Solus emerging from the forbidden confines of the inner sanctum. However, with a wave of his hand, the prince put them at ease, and in hushed tones, Andrew and his lieutenant continued their conversation as they marched down the grand corridors. Andrew's mind focused on each word Solus uttered. He had the utmost confidence in their scheme. All variables had been accounted for. The opportunity for possible disruptions had been minimized. Hopefully, no unforeseen hurdles would arise.